Today is session 2 of our virtual annual general meeting, and the theme for today is around policy systems and governance. And for those who were with us yesterday, I'm curious if someone would want to share how was that experience for you? Was there anything particular that you came out with or came out of the session with? So, who would like to share? How was yesterday's session for you? Especially for those who were here yesterday or even the day before when we started the expo. Anyone who Yusuf, how was it for you yesterday? I'm curious to while we're
Yeah,
waiting for people to
well,
jump in and come in.
Lana, frankly speaking, yesterday I came to know something about the AI system and the disease, but
Mm.
the sometime there were like some disturbance in the sound and something. So I hope like today I could get more knowledge on it.
Yeah. And this is the reason why we're recording things so that it's easier for us to also watch it later on. We would also be sharing the reports from the rapporteurs. We have rapporteurs in all the sessions. So you also have an idea of what has transpired. I know it's so easy to get into that FOMO, fear of missing out. And like, oh, this is also very interesting conversation. So don't worry. There will be time and opportunity for that. So let me just stop my share first, and I would love for us to get into a practice of checking in. How are you arriving for today? I do hope you remember in the last two meetings there were different ways in which we've been checking in, and today I'm gonna offer a different one as well. So, what's your internal weather like? And so, in the chat, just add in, are you a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, a 7, an 8, or a 9? What's your internal weather like as you're coming here in the space together? So, let's see what's coming up for people. There you go. Ooh, a 5 and an 8. People coming in with 5s and an 8. Very rainbow and sunny. 8665. Ooh. So thank you for joining in. And like what I said, today's session is similar to how we did it yesterday with different parallel sessions and plenary sessions, all within the theme of looking at policy systems and governance. So it's a very heavy topic, and yet I know uh, policy systems and governance is very central to the work that we're doing. And if we really think about it, no matter how strong the tools, the models, or the data systems are, they will not have an impact without effective governance and enabling policy environments. And this is why this topic is very crucial in our conversations today. So, for those of you who are just coming in, just today, like what I mentioned, the previous sessions have been recorded. So after the AGM, you'll have access to this. Plus, if you'd want to know more about CSID network and how the membership would go, feel free to also join us on Thursday, wherein we would spend an hour and a half, really talking about membership, how that would look like, and what we can contribute in the membership as well. So that would happen on Thursday. And if you want to get into the mailing list, I'll also be sharing that with you later on in terms of how to get into the mailing list for those interested to know more about the membership. And with that, I would love to hand it over. So today we'll have two co-chairs who would be facilitating our sessions today. Um, the first part will be facilitated by Lucho, and then the second part will be facilitated by Charlotte. So I'm going to be handing it over to them to introduce themselves, their amazing work, and what it is that we can expect for today's session. So, Lucho.
Okay, thanks so much, Lana, and thanks everyone. Thanks for joining this session. So I'm Lucho Angabet. I have a background in medicine, empirical bioethics, and transdisciplinary solutions, global health. My work lately has mainly been focused on decolonization of knowledge systems at the intersection of climate change and health. So I am very, very excited to be here, and I currently serve as the head of international programs at the African Population and Health Research Center in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you. Charlotte?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lucho, and hi everyone. I'm Charlotte Mbu, and I am a public health practitioner with a background in community health and frontline field epidemiology. I currently work as deputy director of the Geneva Learning Foundation. We are a Swiss-based NGO, and our focus is really on looking for new ways to address critical threats that are faced by our community. And in recent years, our focus has really been tackling the challenges of climate change on health from the perspective of frontline health workers in sub-Saharan Africa and globally. So, as I said, it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon and to co-chair this session with Lucho. So, Lucho, over to you for the start.
No, thanks so much, Charlotte, and really happy to have everyone here for this important session on policy systems and governance. And it's an honor for me to give the opening remarks before we actually get into the active work. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who is actually joining us from across the globe. It's my pleasure to welcome you to day 2 of this vital convening organized by the Climate Sensitive Infectious Disease Network. Today's theme, policy, systems, and governance, goes right to the heart of what makes or breaks our collective response to climate-sensitive infectious diseases. And I think it's really important that we start with the hard truth. The question we need to ask ourselves is, no matter how advanced our tools are, no matter how predictive our models are going to be, and no matter how robust our data systems are going to be, none of it matters. None of it moves the needle if policy systems are actually not prepared to act. Policy systems and governance are often the invisible yet essential architecture that connects data to discussions. They determine what is seen, what is prioritized, and perhaps most importantly, what is acted upon. Without this critical connective tissue, data remains stranded and evidence becomes irrelevant. Across the global south, especially in Africa, we have seen this disconnect play out repeatedly. Early warning systems trigger alerts, yes, yet responses are delayed. Forecasts actually predict outbreaks, but budgets remain inflexible. Research highlights the risks, but institutional silos prevent joint planning. We need to ask ourselves, is it that the science is insufficient, or is it that the systems aren't responsive enough? Today, we are going to delve into the political, bureaucratic, and structural determinants that either enable or constrain climate and health action. And this is crucial because governance is not just about policies written on paper. It is about institutional capacity, intersectoral collaboration and coordination, financing arrangements, and accountability mechanisms. It's about ensuring that ministries of health, environment, water, agriculture, and finance do not just operate in parallel, but in synergy. But the critical question actually remains, what is synergy? In our discussions today, I will urge us to reflect on a few critical points. First, governance has to be adaptive. Climate-sensitive diseases do not respect sectoral boundaries or bureaucratic calendars. Our systems must be flexible enough to act in uncertainty and inclusive enough to integrate both scientific evidence and community intelligence. Second, policy environments must be enabling, not extractive. Too often, health systems are asked to do more with less, while environmental governance remains under-resourced. We need to shift from crisis response to anticipatory preventive governance, where data is not only collected, but budgeted for, legislated for, and institutionalized. Third, we must rethink financing. Climate resilient health systems require investment, not just in infrastructure and personnel, but in governance mechanisms. Policy harmonization, local government capacity, and cross-sectoral leadership remain very critical. The fourth, power and equity must be at the center of everything that we do. Governance is not neutral. It reflects who has authority to decide, who gets resourced, and whose knowledge actually counts. We must create governance systems that center justice, elevate marginalized voices, and are accountable to the communities that are most affected. Let me close with this. Data can guide us, but governance will determine whether we listen. Models can predict outbreaks, but policy would actually determine whether we prevent them. Evidence can inform us, but it takes political will, institutional courage, and collective leadership to act. Today's session is actually a very huge opportunity, not only to critique what's broken, but to co-create what's possible. It's just the beginning of a discussion. Let us use this space not merely to diagnose policy failure, but to design governance futures that are bold, inclusive, and grounded in our lived climate and health realities. And I'll end by saying, as we see, communities are supposed to be centered in everything that we do. That lived experience is expertise and has to be appreciated at its highest value. Thank you, and I wish all of us a productive and transformative day of dialogue. Thank you very much. Lana, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Lucho. And I would like to invite everyone to just show appreciation with some reactions, hearts, claps. Thank you, Lucho. There's so many significant points that you've raised, Lucho, that we hope to start, like we said, start the conversation, right? We know that it's not something that we can solve or we can address in just one sitting. So hopefully we can start the conversations. And this is the reason why we've created the sessions to have parallel sessions where we can do those conversations. And so we do have, and like what we've shared in the previous days, that for you to know what is going on,
Communication, so it's fine.
There you go. For you to know what is going on for the next few days, we have this link where you can see all the AGM meeting hub with the different information. And if you download the schedule, you would see what are the talks, what are the conversations that are happening. And so for today, we'll have parallel sessions with Stephen, with Peace, and then two open space questions that I would be hosting and Lucho would be facilitating as well, for us to start discussing these different themes. So, Stephen, I would like to invite you first for a short. What is your topic about? What is it that they can, that they can explore in your conversation around the legislative strategies? I'm gonna stop share. Stephen, what do you want to? I'm. I know Stephen was here, so Stephen. Did we just lose Stephen? Yusuf?
No.
Let me see. Maybe I can just invite first Pampero Peace, Kaima. If you can share what your topic is about, what you would be facilitating on. There you go. So just a few short description of what it is that you will be tackling in your breakout room.
All right, so I am Pimperapi Skaime. So basically, I'm an adult health nurse, but currently I'm serving as a communicable uh, I'm serving as a communicable disease nurse and HIV/AIDS counselor, and I'm doing my master's in public health and another master's in infectious disease epidemiology. So basically, today I'll be taking you through the integration behavior and public health strategies, where we're going to look at, or it's going to sit at the intersection of people, policy, and systems as we explore this through today's theme, where we are looking at policy systems and governance, and we're acknowledging the central truth of no matter how advances our data system or models are, they can never drive change without strong responses governance. So basically, as we know that policy systems are the backbone of whatever that we are doing in the system. So we're going to look at we're going to dive into how governance frameworks, institutions, or even arrangements, and even financing choices either enable or strain the success of climate-sensitive infectious diseases. So we are going to look at not just about what needs to be done, but basically what we can do in ways that we can honor human behavior, strengthen policy structures, and also drive sustainable impact. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And then I see Stephen. Stephen is just coming back in again. Stephen, would you want to share a few words about what your parallel session is about so that the people would know more about it?
Thank you very much, Lana. I think I had a few issues with my internet.
We can hear you a little softly, but we can hear you.
So in this session, we are going to explore the legislative strategies and how informed lawmaking can create the foundation for stronger, responsive, and inclusive health systems to combat CSID. So the key things we are going to look at, number one is policy and action. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Just go ahead.
Okay, the first thing we are going to look at is the policy and action. We all know that strong laws are often the missing link between what we know and what we do. And we are also going to look at the second insight is there is what we call we all know that in many times we think that laws are only made by politicians in parliament, but that's not the full picture. There is that community voice, like Lucio said it in the opening remarks. The community voice is also important because you can have good ideas, you can have good laws, but if there is no implementation, then it's just noise. And then there's what we call climate and health, which is the legal blind spot. Climate change is making many diseases worse, and even new diseases are appearing in places they never existed before. So we are going to look at that. We are going to explore. That is just the overview of what we are going to discuss in the session room one.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. And we'll have in room 3, that will be with Lucho, around the question of what are examples of successful uptake and use of models and tools in national decision making systems. So that will be, and then in the main room, this would be, I would be facilitating that, and this would go around the question of, let me just add this in right now. How can we measure the impact of CSID tools? So we would be doing what's this? We would be doing the first, the parallel session, and this will be a 45-minute session wherein we are using the law of 2 feet, meaning all the rooms will be open, so you can move through the different conversations if you want to. We will have 3 rooms plus the main room happening here, and like what we did also yesterday, for those who would need interpretation, if you can stay in the main room, then we would have the interpreters also supporting in that area. And we would then be having Steven's room as room 1, and room 2 would be with Pempero, and room 3, Lucho and Charlotte will be there, and in the main room, I will be here. So, Yusuf, are we ready to bring them into the breakouts?
Thank you so much, Lana, and I hope everyone is back in the plenary. So, warm welcome back. So right now we're going to turn towards the facilitators of the different parallel discussions to just tell us what are the key takeaways from the conversation, and you may choose to appoint the person that will speak for the session. If I don't know if it's going to be the rapporteur or the facilitator themselves, but I think we are going to start with Stephen. Stephen, are you able to unmute yourself?
Thank you very much, Carlo. But I was the facilitator. We had the rapporteur. I don't know whether she's in a position to report.
So we'll have Nice. I don't know if Nice can jump in, or anyone from the group, anyone who would like to share what came up for you.
Or I can share. Let me just share.
Go for it. Was that Stephen that says?
Stephen, we can't hear you. It looks as if Stephen has maybe some technical issues with his audio. So I think we can go, I can hand over to Peace. We're hoping that Stephen, you'll be able to, we can come back to you afterwards. So Peace. Lana, is it just me, or it's as if I can't see Peace in the room anymore?
No, yes. Perhaps there was also some connection issues with Peace.
Yeah.
Perhaps
So the
anyone from
rapporteur,
her group. Yeah.
who's the rapporteur in that group, if you can share with us.
I know Heidi was there in the group, or perhaps anyone that was in the group as well. Feel free to share.
Okay.
Just give me a few minutes. Let me just
Heidi,
summarize.
yes.
Yeah. Just let me summarize, and I will get back.
Okay, so I can turn towards Daniel to talk about what we got to discuss in our group. We're looking at examples of successful uptakes of models, uptake and use of models and tools for national decision making, and some of the blockers or barriers to the uptake. So I don't know if Daniel, you want to share maybe in just 2 sentences a few things that we took away from our discussion.
Okay, all right. I hope I'm audible. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we are
Yes,
Well,
loud
we
and
had a
clear.
lot of discussions around how some of these tools, the existing tools have been adopted in the national health systems and some blockers as well. I think we discussed around DHIS systems, which most countries have been adopting in collecting data. And then Charlotte mentioned around event-based surveillance system that is being used in Cameroon. And we also have a discussion around the dengue early warning system that the project that they are currently working on in North America. I think we had a lot of discussions around some systems in place, and we talk about some blockers that are currently that we are currently facing generally, especially in climate sensitive infectious disease space, climate health related space. So we discuss about infrastructure problems, so like electricity issues and the likes. We also discuss about capacity building and interoperability issues. We discuss about our user experience and the likes. And at the end of everything, we round it up talking about community, like while trying to implement some of these things, we need to start with the community. We need to start from the community level. We need to build together with the community. We need to co-design together with the community from the onset. Yeah, I think that's a brief things we discuss about in our breakout session. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing that. So, Heidi, are you able to share with us, or Peace? Can you? We lost Peace again, so we'll go straight to Heidi. I don't know if you're ready. And for other members of the group, if you are there, you listen to the conversation, you can also type your key takeaways, maybe just one takeaway in the chat, one thing that you learned during the parallel session. That would be great as well. Yes, Stephen?
Thank you very much. Can I report for session 1, please?
Yes, please go ahead.
So in session 1, we discussed about the legislative strategies for strengthening health systems and combating infectious diseases. And in this session, we explored how legal and policy tools can help build more responsive, inclusive, and climate-aware health systems, and this particularly in managing CSID. The discussion was structured around 3 core insights: policy and action, policy precedes action, and we discussed how strong legislative frameworks form the foundation for effective disease prevention and response. We all know that good policies are the link between research, data, and real-world impact. We also discussed about the role of the community voice, which is non-legislators.
Thank you so much, Lana, and a warm welcome back, everyone. I hope you were able to catch a breather. Hope you had probably your favorite beverage. I don't know if it's a coffee, tea, or glass of juice, but I hope that you're back with enough energy for us to go to the next part of our session. We are going to be having a plenary discussion building on the rich set of discussions that we have just had in our parallel sessions. And during those parallel sessions, we got to explore legislative strategies for health system strengthening, the integration of behavioral science into public health policy, the critical question of successful model uptake in national decision-making systems, and how we measure impact and make the case for return on investment to governments. These conversations have kind of illuminated a common thread: the gap between evidence and action, between tools and implementation, between community knowledge and policy response. Now we want to turn into a domain that embodies all of these challenges. That is water. Water is simultaneously a vector, a determinant and a solution in our climate-sensitive infectious disease landscape. It is where legislative frameworks, behavioral interventions, predictive models, and impact measurement must all converge, often in real time. But here's what our parallel sessions have prepared us to examine. What happens when we have robust water-focused research, engaged communities ready to act, and even predictive tools, but the policy systems are not equipped to receive, integrate, or respond? This is where the legislative strategies, model uptake challenges, and return on investment conversations we've just had become concrete and urgent. Our distinguished panelists that are with us today represent different entry points into these realities, from translating research for public engagement to participatory approaches generating community solutions, to surveillance systems producing actionable data, to the complex work of aligning research with policy action. The question that is going to guide our discussion builds on everything we have heard today, and most probably even since yesterday. In water-focused research and citizen engagement, what does policy and governance have to do with it? Allow me right now to introduce our panelists, and I'm going to start with Amber Abrams, who is a senior research officer at Future Water, a transdisciplinary research institute at the University of Cape Town, based in the Department of Civil Engineering. She has over 25 years of experience working in academia for government and private sector in fields of public health, research, science, at the intersection of humans and environment, and in social engagement, translating research science for publics in South Africa. Our next panelist is Jill Black, who is a specialist practitioner and scholar in global health and engaged research. She co-founded the NGO, the Sustainable Livelihoods Foundation 15 years ago, and has since led numerous community-based participatory research projects with growing emphasis on environmental health. Jill's work explores novel approaches to knowledge exchange, co-production, and policy engagement to strengthen community-derived strategies that address public health risks and mitigate climate change impacts. Our third panelist is Seshaba Tokubo, who is a senior specialist and PhD candidate. And I'm getting indications that my connectivity is unstable, so I'll turn off my video. So I was saying that Seshaba Tokubo is a senior scientist and PhD candidate with a master's degree in bioinformatics alongside honors and undergraduate training in genetics and microbiology. With research experience spanning transcriptomics, epigenetics, and antimicrobial resistance, Sechaba has developed a strong foundation in data analysis, statistical modeling, and pipeline development using R and Python. At the National Institute of Communicable Diseases, Sechaba led SARS-CoV-2 wastewater genomic surveillance and created a next flow variant calling pipeline. The last panelist, but not the least for today, is Maxine Jonker, who is a public health professional holding a master's in public health and with over 6 years experience in environmental health research, project management, and stakeholder engagement. As project manager for the University of Cape Town's Division of Environmental Health, she currently manages international research collaborations that primarily focus on various aspects of sound management of chemicals and pesticides, knowledge translation, climate change, and One Health. So right now, I am going to turn towards our panelists, and I have a series of questions for them. But my first question will go to Amber. Amber, based on your work translating environmental research for public engagement in South Africa, what strategies have proven to be most effective in building communities' trust and influencing climate health policy uptake?
Sure. Thank you so much, Charlotte, for that introduction. I had also created a little PowerPoint to explain why we were focusing on water, but I don't need to share that if we're just going to go this way. So to answer your question about the most useful, yeah.
You should be able to share a PowerPoint as well. Jill also asked that.
Okay, so no problem. Mine was really just grounding why we're focusing on water as a climate sensitive topic. But Charlotte's done a really great introduction, so I don't think I need to go through that PowerPoint. It highlighted the transdisciplinary nature of the institute I work at, and the types of work we do. But to answer Charlotte's question more directly, I think I've heard this reflected in the breakout group I was in today earlier as well. I think the reality is that to build trust takes time. It takes patience. It takes layering a bunch of techniques. One of the techniques I really like to engage with are arts-based techniques because it takes some of the pressure out of the researcher or researcher policymaker relationships. And I think the most important is recognizing that you need to take time to do this type of trust building. And that the time put in is not always going to have the types of outputs that funders necessarily understand or want to see. And that building trust through a long kind of process of layered techniques is probably the most feasible way to get a coalition of people understanding what it is that you're trying to share.
Okay, thanks so much, Amber. And I wanted you to deep dive a little bit into the art-based techniques that you're using, and also talk a little bit more about the layering. Why is it important and how do you go about that? And I'd like to invite everyone in the room, if you have any questions for our panelists, please do not hesitate to leave your questions in the chat. So, Amber?
Sure. So the layering aspects relate to the reality that everyone likes to communicate in different ways. Different people feel comfortable doing different types of techniques, whether it's about drawing or working on a map or working with others in collaboratory mapping. And everyone can communicate in different ways. And so what we find is by layering techniques, we can access the most people to get involved. And we find by layering techniques, we also can draw out things that are most exciting to people or most pressing or most important in the topics we're exploring with them. When it comes to a variety of arts-based techniques that I've been involved in, this can include anything from community mapping to body mapping to, and Jill will tell you about one project we were involved in, I believe, where digital storytelling was really important. In the past, I've used photo voice and photo journaling, as well as daily diaries, so where people are asked to reflect daily on a particular practice, or in this case, health-related context. I think often, depending on, in the Southern African context, role playing works really well. People enjoy engaging. A lot of people, not all people, enjoy engaging in developing role playing or techniques where there's some type of performance. So I think a wide range of arts-based techniques we've found useful in the work we do.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Amber. And right now, I would like to turn towards Jill with my next question. And Jill, I know you have a PowerPoint, so please you can go ahead and share your screen. But my question to you is this. You've led impactful community participatory projects. How can governance systems better integrate community-generated data and solutions into formal policy making on climate and infectious disease intersections?
Okay, thanks very much, Charlotte. It's a great honor to be part of this panel today, and thank you so much for the introduction. So in an attempt to answer your question, and in contributing to your discussion about some of the political, the bureaucratic, and the structural factors that shape whether climate and health tools actually translate into real-world action, I'm going to use a case study from Cape Town in South Africa. And I do have a few slides to share, so I hope that everyone can bear with me. So before I do that, just to emphasize that my perspective is that of a researcher practitioner, with my experience over the past 15 years rooted in community-based participatory research, transdisciplinary action-oriented approaches, and the co-production of knowledge. And so the purpose of my current work is to support the generation of community-derived, pragmatic, contextually relevant mitigation strategies to address climate change impacts. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Who can share? Oh, I get a little notice saying advanced sharing options. Who can share, host only or all participants? I'll just change that to all participants and try again.
You should
I'm
be
not getting
able
the
to
option.
share.
I'm not getting the option to share my screen.
Would you like to email that to me now, Jill, and then I can
No.
check from my end?
Well, we don't have to worry. I only had 4 slides anyway, and I can talk through the case study without the slides. I'll try my best to keep it engaging. So the case study was a 3-year research project. It was by the name of UKRI GCRF, which was the funder. Water and Fire: Enhancing Capacity and Reducing Risk through Best Bets for Transformative Adaptation with Vulnerable Residents on the Cape Flats. And the Sustainable Livelihoods Foundation led the fieldwork, and Future Water, Amber's organisation, was a partner organisation, and Amber was a co-investigator on the project. So the research activities did wrap up at the end of 2022, and we have a number of publications. We're continuing to disseminate the learning, and today's event is an example of that. So just to give you the context, Cape Flats, it's a large, low-lying sandy area, and it lies to the southeast of Cape Town Central Business District. It's characterised by a history of forced removals during apartheid, and this has led to the establishment of townships and informal settlements. And the area faces entrenched and cross-cutting challenges, poverty, crime, and inadequate infrastructure. So the settings for the Water and Fire research project were 2 informal settlements and a large township in and around the Cape Flats area. And we worked with a total of 30 adults who were living in these settings. So the overall goal of the project was to address disaster risk challenges that were associated with the 3 environmental hazards of runaway fires, localised flooding, and water shortage. And to achieve that goal, the research aimed to engage and involve multiple stakeholders, with emphasis on involving affected community members in co-developing a series of intervention strategies, which we called Best Bets, to respond effectively to these prevalent climate-related challenges: the fire, the flooding, and the water shortage. And in so doing, we tested innovative methods of knowledge mobilisation and democratic participation. So the City of Cape Town has developed and published a strategic framework to enhance resilience and mitigate the impacts of climate change in the city. And the framework emphasises the intention of the city to support participatory approaches and to integrate public participation in the development of policies to build collective resilience amongst the city's residents. And so the Water and Fire project was really designed to embrace this framework and to support the city in understanding lived experience, day-to-day realities in the most vulnerable areas of the city, and also to integrate the perspectives and insights of people who live in these areas. So whereas the project didn't have an infectious disease focus, We know from what we've been hearing over the past couple of days that floods and shortage of water increase the risk of infectious diseases very, very significantly. So the 30 community members that took part were engaged and involved in the project as co-researchers. They generated data and evidence through a layered participatory visual methods approach. We've heard about that from Amber. And in this case, that involved digital storytelling, followed by community mapping, followed by photo voice. And so the community members worked for 2 years to generate that, to go through these processes and to generate that data. So when Amber mentions time, we're talking about real time, 2 years in this case. And as part of that, the community participants were supported by the co-researchers, the co-investigators, including myself and Amber, to triangulate the data they had generated and to collectively analyze it and to interpret it. And the findings from their analysis and interpretation was unpacked, and it was drawn into a total of 17 best bets to strengthen environmental disaster risk management. So their best bets covered flooding, fire, and water shortage. They comprised a balance of strategies that would include community and government and NGOs working together. So the 30 community co-researchers then went on to present their data and their best bets intervention strategies at a total of 4 separate engagement events. So one engagement event was held in each of the 3 study settings, and then a larger co-production event brought all 30 co-researchers together in one room with other members of their communities that they had invited, government representatives, academics, and members of different NGOs. And the purpose of bringing everybody together like that was to review these 17 best bets that had been derived through the work of the community members, to make adjustments to them, to expand them in line with all the discussions and inputs from the other stakeholder groups. So what happened? Well, there was terrific interest in all of the engagement events. All 4 were attended by representatives from various departments of the City of Cape Town and provincial government. We had people there from disaster risk management, from the Department of Health, from water and sanitation, and from human settlements. The head of the resilience unit for the City of Cape Town was there, and he really took part, and a number of ward councillors also came, and those were the ward councillors for the areas where the participating community members came from. The community members really owned the floor. They presented their data and their best bets with confidence and with conviction. There was good listening, there was great interaction, and there was a real spirit of respect and collaboration at the round tables in the co-production process. Now, sure, obviously there were some tensions because of previous interactions, but overall, on the whole, the events went very well, and co-production really happened in those spaces. So then what happened? Well, not very much, and certainly not enough. And so how I see the challenges are, and first of all, and this is not so much to do with policy and governance, but this is something that I feel very strongly about, and Amber knows this. There is zero obligation for funders to continue funding research that has achieved or superseded its aims and objectives, but needs further support to sustain the multi-stakeholder partnerships that have been built through the first phase of work. And linked to this, There is zero obligation or accountability to respond to the findings of transdisciplinary research, such as the project I've just presented to you, to take up and implement strategies that emerge through the co-production of knowledge, even when government has been directly engaged and involved in co-producing that knowledge. The community members who worked as the co-researchers on this project worked really hard to generate that information. And so both of these factors, the lack of obligation and accountability from both research funders and government bodies, causes tremendous damage to the efforts to build equitable partnership. Trust is burnt to cinders, hope is washed away, and aspiration dries up. And linked to this, the people who live in the most socioeconomically deprived places are the most at risk of climate-sensitive infectious disease, and yet they have very little power or political influence. Their experience, their insights, their recommendations in public participation initiatives as experts are not taken seriously enough, not nearly seriously enough. And then linked to this, and my last point, the most socioeconomically deprived places in the world are informal settlements and slums. And these places are impacted very hard by floods and water shortage. And certainly in the South African context, there's a growing number of informal settlements that are not approved or recognised by government. And they have absolutely no water infrastructure, they have no facilities for sanitation and hygiene. And because they are seen as illegal, government does not act, as acting would legitimise these human settlements. So this brings us to the point that no matter how strong your tools, your models, or your data systems are, they will not make an impact without effective governance and enabling policy environments.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jill. And you can click on the reaction buttons on the bottom of your screen just to share some hand clapping emojis, some heart emojis for Jill for that presentation. Thank you so much. And I know there are some questions and comments in the chat. There are some questions and comments in the chat. We will come to them after I would have reached out to Sechaba and Maxine with my questions. I'm sure there are lots and lots of questions connecting what Jill and Amber have said to the discussions that started yesterday and also the parallel sessions that we had earlier on. So I'm looking forward to a great conversation after this. So my question to you, Sechaba, is given your experience in developing genomic surveillance pipelines, how can data integration between environmental, microbial, and epidemiological domains be enhanced to inform policy in real time?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sechaba, and I am a bioinformatician at the South African Medical Research Council. And just a bit of context, so we pretty much do pathogen surveillance in wastewater, and then we correlate it to clinical case data. So to answer your question, Charlotte, so from my experience working with environmental data to pretty much detect microbes, a lot of the times we work with clinicians and we work with research institutions. And we have noticed that whenever we share data, we don't have standardized metadata or approaches to report this data. So my first point would be that to develop unified data standards as well as a metadata framework. So this particularly assists in situations where we're trying to analyze and correlate what we're seeing in wastewater data or environmental samples, as well as what is happening in clinical case data. And secondly, which will bring me to my next point, when we do have standardized metadata as well as standardized data or formatting, it helps us with applying machine learning models for predictions. So quite a bit of my work has been surveilling SARS-CoV-2 in wastewater, and then from there correlating it with what we're seeing in clinical case data, and then applying machine learning models. So when we do that and when we do have standardized formats, we're able to plot our models and exactly show it to the public, as well as build dashboards so that people can interact with these dashboards and see what exactly is happening from a wastewater perspective, as well as from a clinical case perspective, and also potentially use that data for an early warning system. Which then also brings me to my last point. So when I was working with the South African Medical Research Council, and when I was at the National Institute for Communicable Diseases, we had to foster a collaboration or a research groups between different institutions who were doing SARS-CoV-2. So we were bringing a wastewater perspective, and they were bringing in genomic surveillance from a clinical case data. So for that to work, we had to meet on a monthly basis, and this involved multiple institutions. So it involves the South African Medical Research Council, the National Institute for Communicable Diseases, as well as other research institutes. From there on, we would then report on what we're seeing, the trends that we're seeing in the wastewater data, and they would report on what they're seeing on a clinical case basis. And then from there, if we had correlating data, or if we were seeing something that was potentially reporting as an early warning system, we would then contact the Department of Health. So there was a bit of collaboration and cohesion. And then from there, we would then flag it for something to potentially happen. And this also then would, I guess, correlate and work in situations where we have droughts or floods, and if there's anything potentially causing increase in temperature, we could then monitor things like cholera and salmonella on a wastewater perspective, and then this could then flag the Department of Health to do something about it. Yeah, over.
Okay, thanks so much, Sishaba. And so my last question is to you, Maxine. And I want to find out from you, as a manager of global environmental health collaborations, what governance challenges do you frequently face in aligning international research outputs with national policy action in Africa? And what are some actionable solutions that you have found to these challenges?
Thank you. Thanks so much, Charlotte. And yeah, just thank you to everybody, to the organizers and to the other panelists for just giving me the opportunity to be here and to share some inputs. Yeah, I am not an expert in the water world, but we have done some recent work with Amber and her team and have learned a lot around this area. But I do have other experience, yeah, as your question has alluded to, just with some international kind of collaborations, as well as experience at community levels and experience working with governments. And so, yeah, it's a great question. And I do definitely have some thoughts to share. And I think one of the main challenges we see with like implementing these kind of international research outputs, international policy is often the kind of country-specific context is missed. And so we have these incredible like recommendations being given to governments, to businesses, to community stakeholders on what they should implement, how they should implement these guidelines. But often there's very little consideration of what the local context is. And so, you know, it's really difficult then to start implementing these things when there's political will that you have to consider, when there's resource mobilization issues, when financial resources is lacking. And so these are some of the local contexts in Africa that we are often faced with. Political will is one of the big ones. You know, often when it comes to governance issues, policymakers sit under an administration. And if something is not a priority for an administration, I mean, we're seeing this on a global level at the moment, then it's really difficult to get any of these sort of things implemented. If it's not prioritized by your government and by your leaders, then how do we get these things into policy? So that's also something that we really have to think about is political will. In terms of the resource mobilization, I mean, Africa often has huge challenges with financial resources. And so we get these like recommendations and these research outputs coming from higher income countries, but then there's very little said in the recommendations about how do you actually mobilize financial resources to be able to implement these actions. And so it's do this, do that, do this. but nothing really about, well, this is how you can finance it. This is how it can be sustainable in your context. So that's kind of the one level. Another level is which I think Jill's alluded to a little bit in her presentation as well, is the complex governing structures. Particularly in South Africa, we really operate in silos in our government. We have many ministries that have their departments underneath them, but none of them talk to each other and none of them are working together to address these kinds of issues and to implement policy. But a lot of these recommendations and a lot of the outputs that will come from international spaces will address issues that are multidisciplinary. But because of the way that our governing structures are kind of set up, it's made it very difficult for ministries to work together. And so whether it comes from just a lack of effort or whether it comes from the actual structures in terms of budgets for different ministries, there's so many challenges in that space that if you are wanting to approach something from a multidisciplinary perspective, it's really difficult to find a way to work together and in terms of who's funding what, whose responsibility is what. And so that's one challenge in terms of, I know from a South African context, is we often have people kind of, here's this issue, oh, well, it's the Department of Health's problem. Oh, it's the environmental department's problem. Where actually, if they work together, we might be able to get more done. But yeah, it's the way that the structures are kind of set up has limited a lot of that kind of working across the silos. And so then as we get the pressure on government and they're feeling kind of locked in, not able to address anything and not being able to drive anything into policy, unfortunately, what we see is pressure then gets transferred to the community. And in our experience, I mean, as I mentioned, I don't have a lot of experience in the water world, but I can tell I have a lot of experience from chemicals and pesticides. And what we see is, on an international level, when it comes to the use of pesticides in farming, we'll have, farmers being told, oh, well, try and use alternatives to pesticides instead of using these like toxic chemicals because it's bad for your health and etc. But what is not considered is that this might be a small-scale farmer in a rural area in Africa, and how are they going to access alternatives that are way more expensive than what is on offer? And so that's kind of a challenge, one pressure that gets put on the community. Another side is we have recently seen some unfortunate deaths from pesticide poisoning in children. And what's ended up happening is that the vendors, the street vendors, our informal vendors, have kind of been the ones that have taken the brunt, that have all the responsibility has been put on them for the fact that this has happened. But if we just had correct governance in this area, then these illegal pesticides that are being sold wouldn't even get into the country in the first place. But there's governance and there's enforcement issues higher up. And so again, we see when there's pressure on government, the responsibility gets shifted to the community level. And so in terms of things, it's a very complex issue, but in terms of things to address it and to try and find a way forward. So I think from the community level, really teaching our community stakeholders the right language to use when they're speaking to their government officials that they have contacts with, when they are in the same room as a policymaker, teaching them the right language to use, the rights that they have, and what their role actually is from a community level. Is it advocacy? Is it behavior change? Is it mobilizing resources? Like, what is their actual responsibility? So that when responsibility is shifted, they can also stand up and say, no, that's not on me. I think in terms of government, we need to really look at the silo thinking. That's really going to help us be able to kind of like push things into national policy, is if we can break through our silos. And I know I had someone that said, we've been trying to restructure ourselves out of silos for years and it just hasn't worked. So silos may not be going anywhere. And for some issues, they might actually be necessary. But we need to start finding ways to take multidisciplinary approaches to implementing stuff into policy. You can change something in one set of policy, but if it doesn't translate into another side, like it's just not going to really be effective, because one department will be doing things a certain way while the other continues. And then just in terms of the research, in terms of the international research outputs and what's being put out there, I mean, I've sat in conferences where the most incredible research has been presented, and then there's been a government official, a policymaker in the room, and they've stood up and said, what am I supposed to do with this information? And so there's also like a miscommunication between the research world and international research outputs and how that is actually supposed to be actioned into policy. So I think something that's really important is that all research that gets produced, we need to make sure that there are policy recommendations and that there are actionable items from the research that governments, that policymakers can grab hold of and say, okay, I now know what you want me to do with this information.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Maxine. After listening to all of your answers to my questions, and Amber, I've been seeing you frantically typing in the chat, lots of interesting comments, and also a couple of questions, but I would really want to encourage all those in the room. There is so much to unpack from what we have heard today. And so please go ahead and start typing your questions, or you could raise your hand if you want to speak, and I'll be delighted to invite you to unmute yourself. But while waiting for those in the room to indicate, I would like to turn towards you, Amber, just to summarize in a bit all of the comments that you have left in the chat while listening to Jill, Maxine, and Seshaba share. And then afterwards, I can come back to you with a couple of questions and also share questions from colleagues that are in the room with us today.
Sure. So I've put online the little PowerPoint presentation that was going to introduce today. So please feel free to take a look at that. And then I've highlighted that, like Jill, as Jill was talking, highlighted that pushing against funders is also something that came up in our breakout group. And having them better understand the processes of what we go through and how we build coalitions with local residents and how important that is to a sustainable process and that they should be accountable to that. And then the other thing I was speaking about was in response to Clarkson's question about how to most effectively translate policy and government approaches in this community, in the context of community-driven actionable research. I suggested that I think policy approaches of taking local residents as experts in their own lives is one important step. And then I highlighted, drawing off of what Maxine and Sechaba had both said, that it always seems to take a major crisis for the different silos to work together. And that particularly, I know Sechaba's experience with SARS-CoV-2 through one of her colleagues. I know that in monitoring and surveillance of that, it was a good example of when those silos had to work together to get anything done. And so different units and different departments across South Africa came together, and even globally, actually, for that SARS-CoV-2 surveillance project, came together to make things happen. And why, my question is, why does it always have to be in these moments of major crisis? Surely we should be planning this type of collaboration and work together before those moments of crisis. I see a lot of other people have written questions that I haven't answered, but those were my comments as others were talking.
Yeah, thanks so much, Amber. And you know, your comment around collaboration in moments of crisis is many a times the systems are organized to be reactive instead of proactive. So we respond when the crisis hits, and we know the backs are against the wall, and so action needs to be taken. There is no choice. And then I was going to also mention or ask about the power plays, because usually convening different stakeholders, there's always supposed to be one person that is at the top that can convene the others, and usually it's difficult to know who that person is. That said, I'm going to turn to, I think there was another question from Clarkson, and then I see a question from Samuel and another from Adamu. So I think we'll take those three. before we continue the conversation. So I will start with Clarkson. He was agreeing with you, Amber, and saying recognizing local residents as experts builds trust and ensures relevance. But how can we better support policymakers to institutionalize this approach in long-term water and health planning? But maybe not just water and health planning, all aspects of health planning. Yeah. So I don't know who is going to take that, Maxine or Amber or anyone, based on your experience.
Amber, do you want to give it a go?
We can all have a go if you'd like. I'm not sure I have a great single solution to this because we do struggle sometimes to get policymakers to listen. So some of the ways that we have worked on that, and one of the really amazing aspects of the project Jill described was we invited those policymakers to public events where local residents could express their experiences. And so that the public events where the local residents were speaking to these counselors were opportunities to engage across spaces that don't always have that much engagement. But I think what also allowed, or what was really meaningful, was that the local residents were given an opportunity to really express their experience, but in a way that was made safe because the environment was one of sharing and not of attacking the counselors, or not of being in a public kind of meeting where you were supposed to be raising issues, as much as you had the opportunity to really speak to your experience. And I think having the community co-researchers speak instead of researchers, instead of us as institutional researchers, was really valuable because people who are living in these contexts are experts in them. They're the only ones who really can convey the emotional, visceral experience, for example, of flooding. And so for me, having the policymakers in the room with the local residents, having the residents be supported through a process of being able to tell their stories, which Jill's team did so well, I think that was a way to start to get policymakers to understand the importance of engaging with local residents before making decisions. I'm not sure I have a great solution to the fact that I know policymakers are limited in time, and so an evidence assessment or a short brief is usually the best way to get to them. But I think this face-to-face opportunity, and others can speak to this, was probably, it meant people were moved. The policymakers had a sense of what people were experiencing. Sorry.
Thanks, Amber. Jill, just a quick question. Can you tell us a little bit about the profile of these co-researchers from the communities? What kind of people, for people that may be interested in involving community members as citizen sciences or in their co-research, what kind of people can they target? What's kind of like the demographic characteristics of the co-researchers?
So first of all, I should say that we worked only with adults. I'm not sure if I mentioned that. So this was all people over the age of 18, but we did have quite a big age range. So we did have 18-year-olds all the way up to people into their mid-60s. So I think having a range of ages is important for representation. We had made sure there was a good gender balance, and we made sure that the different cultural groups, language groups that live in the Cape Flats were represented as well through the different places that we worked in. I think identifying community-based co-researchers, it's always helpful if you already are familiar with the context in some way or other, perhaps through previous work. You may have made contacts there in some way or other that can help you. Now, that doesn't have to be community leaders, and community leaders are sometimes not the best people to mobilize for you, because they tend to have their own agendas and have their own preferences about who they want to be involved. But working through informal or formal groups, working with NGOs to identify people is also a good option. And so you don't have to kind of go around and and knock on doors and kind of say, do you want to be involved in the project? You really work with the structures that are already in the community, and you listen to people who are very active in the community about who is interested. I mean, I think, you know, it's really, really important to make sure that people who are brought into a project as co-researchers, especially for a number of years, you know, many months or a couple of years, they need to be concerned and really interested in the project in order to stick the course, because obviously you want the same people to be involved all the way through, because the momentum is building, the data that they're generating is, you know, they're growing their own data sets and understanding their own data sets. So having people who are available and interested is really important. And of course, it's really important to provide compensation for time. You can't expect people to give up so much of their time, and sometimes they have to move mountains at home in different ways in order to be able to be in your workshops, in order to be able to come to these events. And so you know, there needs to be room in your budget to provide monetary compensation, stipend, but certainly to make sure that people are paid for their time.
Thanks so much, Jill. And one thing that I really stood out to me was when Amber talked about councillors, and I know councillors, those are local politicians. So when we talk about institutionalization, I think it's good that involving community members and even those political leaders at the most local levels who can take up the findings and will start, you know, they have access to certain hierarchy and authorities that even institutional researchers may not have. And so they have a voice that can actually influence the uptake of the research findings and having them being translated into policy decisions. So the next question is for you, Sachaba, and it's from Samuel. He says in the chat, listening to the discussion now, especially around the lack of metadata and the potential of integrating genomic surveillance with clinical and water quality data, I'm wondering how can we build systems that meaningfully connect environmental data like water surveillance with clinical and genomic data in a way that is both technically feasible and useful for local health departments? And how do we ensure communities, particularly those most affected, are engaged in this loop of data generation and response?
Okay, thanks, Charlotte. Thanks, Samuel. So from a South African context, I will say that we most definitely do have the infrastructure to store the data as well as integrate the data. So we have a high performance cluster known as the Center for High Performance Computing that can definitely do this. But then I think the tricky thing with our situation is that a lot of times we work with quite a lot of researchers and scientists, and researchers and scientists are great. They do quite a lot of great work, but the problem is people don't like sharing their data openly. So they'll report on what they're getting, but then just the data sharing becomes an issue because one person wants to be the first person to publish a paper. And a lot of the times we don't actually get funding from the Department of Health. So then again, there isn't any initiative to actually share that data. We get quite a lot of funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates. So we do have to publish outputs. So the issue we have is data sharing. So we can't really integrate and share the data because again, people don't want to share the data. But I hope in the near future, it will be a work in progress. But yeah, we do definitely have the infrastructure to do to integrate the data as well as do analysis and machine learning. It's just the data sharing that's an actual issue.
Yeah, thanks, Sechaba. And this is one thing that also came out in the parallel discussion. And it came out as one of the blockers, that is problem of data sharing and data interoperability. So it means potentially that is something we need to be thinking about as researchers. How can we, what can we do to change the situation. And then we had a comment from Adamu Saidu, just agreeing with all of you here on the issue of recognizing the local residents as important stakeholders, build trust and allow full participation. Sometimes this approach allows one to achieve behavior changes in the target communities over time at even a zero cost. Yeah, it comes down to the community's ability to take initiative, because the challenge they are facing, if they don't look for ways to tackle it on their own, it might not be tackled. So they start taking initiative while waiting for external help and research. But I think, Lana, I don't know how well are we doing on time?
We still have more time if you want to.
Okay, that's great, because I really want to give the opportunity for our panelists maybe to just any final thoughts or reflections, and how we can more and more, especially as we are the climate sensitive infectious disease network, how can we ensure that everything that we do, the models we develop, the tools we develop, can actually be used, be taken up and be used by our national ministries of health? How can we better integrate? How can the concept of transdisciplinary research become like the new norm, and not something we are hoping for? And how can we, most importantly, address the challenge of funders, having funding spontaneous intervention and activities, and not thinking about sustainability and long term? I know that is a lot for all of you in such a short time, but I think that we might be able to pick out some insights from these, and also from all of the resources and the slides you have shared with us. So we'll start with Amber, then Jill, and then Sechaba and Maxine.
So I think certainly when it comes to the question of pushing funders, especially in the context of transdisciplinary research, the reality is that as researchers, we have to start taking responsibility to push against funders. And so more and more our unit, as a transdisciplinary research unit, when we get asked to do the very quick and dirty research analysis, for example, that some major funder wants to pay you to do it within 6 months for an exorbitant fee, but with no sustainability attached to it, we've started to push back. We've also started to say no, which is really tough in the South African context, because many of us are soft-funded researchers. So we don't actually have salaries unless we raise them. But it's an ethical responsibility, and we have to let that override the need for a salary or for project funds to keep the programs going. So it also comes down to individual researcher responsibility, and something that we have to take seriously. It's not okay anymore to do extractive data projects that don't end up with any benefit to the people you're working with. And I'm comfortable now in my 40s to say, no, I'm not going to take any of those projects that do that. And I recognize that not everyone is in that position. Early career researchers may not be in that position, but it is an opportunity for us, by pushing back, to change the ways in which these funders do what they do. And so it's something that I've been advocating for much more, and amongst my young research team members, also encouraging them to think about. So it's also a responsibility for all of us, I think. You asked so many amazing questions, but maybe I should stop talking now and let someone else speak, and then we can go back to some of those questions.
Thanks so much, Amber. Jill?
Thanks, Amber. Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, so transdisciplinary research, it's an incredibly exciting field. It's not a new concept, but certainly in the medical sciences, it is newer, and it is growing, and it is gaining more recognition, and I think that's incredibly exciting. Rome wasn't built in a day, as a bit of a cliched saying, but these things, these kind of movements. So let's call it the medical sciences transdisciplinary research movement. It's going to move slowly, and I think that there are still a significant number of of researchers who are finding it difficult to embrace a transdisciplinary approach to their work because they've never been trained that way. They've always done research in a certain way. And to now say, well, now do I really have to involve community? Do I really have to speak to an NGO? Do I really have to learn how to speak to a policymaker to translate my research? That's a lot to people that are researchers are already really busy people. And so, thinking about having to take on all this extra work and responsibility is a major thing to consider. But it is getting there. And I think just circling back to the comment about saying about researchers having to engage with policymakers, I think there's a lot of need for training for researchers to be trained in transdisciplinary research as a field, and especially to be able to translate their research findings to policymakers. And I think that is an area that requires real recognition and real growth and real advancement if we want science to be taken up in policy spaces.
Thank you so much, Jill. Sechaba?
Okay. Thanks, Charlotte. So I'll just add to what Jill was saying. If I know now One Health is such a buzzword, but if all of us as scientists and researchers are going to be serious about One Health, I think integrating all disciplines is quite important. And I think emphasizing the importance of why One Health instead of emphasizing the buzzword of it in basically research labs and in organizations, I think that would then promote us working together and also bringing in governmental departments to actually also then take our research seriously. So I think consistently pushing the One Health agenda will definitely get us going.
Thank you so much, Maxine.
Sure, I think I'm probably just going to repeat a lot of what everyone else has said because I just agree with all of it. But one thing that I kind of mainly wanted to touch on was the uptake of whatever we do into policy recommendations. And I think I really agree with what Jill said around researchers need to be trained on how to translate their research into a policy framing. And one thing I think that helps with that is to understand your policy landscape in your country. Like if you don't know what the policy landscape is at the moment around this issue that you're addressing or you're researching, you're not going to be able to know how do you translate your research into that. You're not going to be able to know what kind of research is actually going to impact on policy. And so I think understanding your policy landscape is a really important thing. And yeah, I totally agree with Sechaba on One Health really promotes this multidisciplinary approach. And I mean, there's many ways of doing it. We did, for one of our projects, we did a technical working group. We got people together and it was a bunch of different stakeholders. It wasn't just government members. It was academics, government members, health professionals. Like it was a technical working group. So it was technical experts. But we formed a document for the CSID region, which was a guideline on highly hazardous pesticide management. But that working group taught us a lot about the whole multidisciplinary approach, but also taught us a lot about what Jill said about Rome wasn't built in a day. It took probably 2 to 3 years just to get a draft document out. And so I think that's also something we need to consider when we're researching stuff. Like, yes, there are immediate concerns and there are things that may be urgent, but we also need to kind of, I think, take the pressure off of ourselves that everything needs to be fixed tomorrow. We need to solve all our problems tomorrow. Like by tomorrow, we must know how to fix this. It's going to take time for us to change the way we do research, to change the landscape, and to introduce things like multidisciplinary research. It's going to take time to understand What do the relationships look like? Who fulfills what role? Whose responsibility is what? And there needs to be open communication and transparency around that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that's kind of just my thoughts on that.
Thank you so much. It's been such a rich session, and I've learned a lot, and I'm sure all the others, the colleagues in the room with me, have also learned so much from this. And I remember at the beginning of this session, my co-chair, Lucio, he said this. He said, today's sessions are an opportunity for us not just to critique what is broken, but to co-create what's possible. So he said, let us use this space not merely to diagnose policy failure, but to design governance futures that are bold, inclusive, grounded in our lived climate and health realities. And I think that is what we have tried to do, especially with this panel discussion. I have seen you share with us about how we need to be bold when we are engaging with funders about what we want to achieve, and how much time it can take, and the need for patience. And they have seen you share your lived experiences, what you have done in your context, and what difference it has made. I really want to thank you, Amber, Jill, for sharing, talking about the research that you conducted around fire, flooding, and water shortages. So I'm really looking forward to looking at the slides. And I want to thank you, Maxine, for bringing your experience around policy engagement, and for sharing some of those solutions that are working, that have worked, encouraging us to be able to engage with policymakers, touch them where you think that their political will is focused, and see how that can change in favor of the actions that we want to take. We need to look at ways to address resource limitations. And one of the ways, based on what you have shared today, has to do with engaging communities, recognizing local expertise and their knowledge, and seeing how it can be useful in addressing some of the challenges that are being faced. The need to train those communities, community stakeholders, on how to talk, how to share their problems, and also how to share their solutions. Looking at ways to address the problem of silo thinking into collective and collaborative thinking. So it means going beyond the buzzwords, or I call it exotic language in global health. Secheba she talked about One Health being a buzzword, transdisciplinary disciplinary research, multidisciplinary research, and stuff. Maybe making it practical by using language that is understandable by everyone in the community. And then most of all, being able to translate research outputs into language that is understood and understandable by those that are capable of taking decisions. So this is just a few of the many things I've taken away from today's session. And I would like to thank you all for coming to share your knowledge with us today. And thanks to everyone that left a comment in the chat and also asked a question that enabled us to enrich our knowledge. And thanks to Lana and the CSID network for the honor given to Lucio and myself to chair today's session. Thanks, and over.
Thank you, thank you. Let's just have a round of appreciations for our panelists, and for Charlotte, and for Lucio, and our
Thank you so
facilitators.
much.
Thank you, thank you. And I would love to, Angela, if you can help me in removing spotlight. I think I can do that now. Very, very, yeah, that was such a rich conversation. And there's so many things that are popping up in my head. And one of the things that I connected with in the conversation is a Japanese practice. And I'm Filipina, so I'm not Japanese, but the minute that I heard about this practice that is being used by Toyota as one of their core principles, this is called nemawashi. And the practice of nemawashi is around digging around the roots. So when you want to transplant, when you want to move a tree to another place, the practice of nemawashi is how can you dig around the roots so that when you transplant and prepare the space for the new place for the root for the tree to take place, that it has the best abilities for it to nourish and to thrive. And what I'm hearing from all the conversation is we need to get the right people involved. We need to get people who are deeply committed, deeply touched, deeply with the lived experiences to be involved in these processes, and that it's not a siloed effort. And what is important is for us to look at it from an integrative lens, and how can we dig around the roots, that everybody is involved, so that when we put out policies, when we put out, when we move that tree, it has a lot of potential for it to be nourished, for it to grow, for it to blossom and flourish. And so, with that, thank you everyone for joining today's session. And we would be sharing the recordings after the AGM, so that you would have access to the different sessions as well, and edited recording for today. So thank you for bearing for today's what's this interference in our sessions. I would like to share some links wherein you can look at our virtual expo. So the High Hive space is a virtual expo that you can join in to watch videos, to look at the different resources that have been shared by our partners. And you can also just walk through the space to know who else is in the field and what they're doing. And then another way is to get involved, get involved in the different activities that will be happening within the network. And how to do that is, aside from joining on Thursday, is for you to sign up and be part of the mailing list. And this is the link for you to do that if you haven't done so already. And like what I mentioned from the start, we do have quite a lot of another round of session for tomorrow. This time around, we will be looking at a different theme, and it would also follow in with the same format, with a plenary session and a panel discussion. And the theme for tomorrow is centering CSID community, equity, and engagement, which is, I would say, a great flow from what we've already discussed for today. And we would love to hear your feedback in terms of how you've experienced today's session. So adding in the last link for today, which is a feedback form that we would also be sharing after the AGM. So if you can give us a feedback on how we can improve our sessions together, and also for ideas for future sessions as well. And with that, I would love to have everyone to just if you can turn on your video, say goodbye in your own language. That will be nice as well. That would be nice to have a space of saying goodbye. Thank you again to Charlotte, to Lucia for being our co-chairs for today. Thank you, Amber, Jill, Sechaba, and Maxine for being our plenary guest. And thank you also for Peace and Stephen for being our facilitators. And of course, for my tech buddy, Yusuf, thank you. And to our interpreters and to our repertours, thank you very much for today's session.